being a founder in general is really, really hard. And then when you layer on crypto and the cycles and the sentiment, whether it's media or more mainstream sentiment, and then the markets, we say here at Han Ventures that crypto is both a market and a technology. And so what many of us are trying to do, I actually credit Brian Armstrong with kind of teaching me this day one when I started at Coinbase and entered the space is, we're fiduciaries. At the same time, for founders and for ourselves, we have a long-term vision, and you sort of have to tune out as best you can the market story.
All right. So we wanted to sit down with a VC to sort of frame out the brand that is crypto. What are the trends they're seeing? The stablecoin conversation, and also what do VCs themselves need to build their own businesses and really to reimagine their own brands. So we went to Rachael Horwitz. Rachael is the CMO at Han Ventures. She and Katie Han were at A16Z when Katie decided to raise a new fund, all focused in crypto. And they've been doing some amazing work since then. It's been about 3 years so far. And so we're really happy to talk to Rachael through the lens of a creative marketer, someone who'd been at Twitter, at Facebook, at Google, at Coinbase. She's, got the chops for this. And it's really a wonderful conversation that is very wide ranging on the opportunity to retell the crypto story and also a little bit how to rethink the VC story. So with that, check out the conversation after the break.
Midnight is a privacy-enhancing blockchain, introducing vital, programmable privacy and selective disclosure capabilities. It means dApps can allow users to control what information is revealed without putting sensitive data on-chain, allowing you to break free from the limitation of choosing between utility or privacy. We deserve more when it comes to privacy. Experience the next generation of blockchain that is private and inclusive by design. Break free with Midnight. Visit midnight.network/breakfree.
All right, we are here with Rachael Horwitz. Rachael is the CMO at Han Ventures. Rachael, very excited to talk to you. You've had a wild career that I want to go into. And I also wanted to sort of just get your take on the VC world, the marketing world, really brand building in the Web3 space, kind of all the things that we cover on this podcast. I know it's been 3 years since you and Katie Han left A16Z to really start launch Han Ventures. What inspired you to take that leap with her?
Oh, man, it's funny that you say it's been 3 years. It actually, I think for everyone in crypto, the last 3 years feels like 7 years. So like, "Oh, yeah, it was only 3 years ago." What inspired me to take the leap was Katie, honestly. I've worked with Katie for a really long time. The A16Z folks, Chris Dixon, and that whole crypto team have actually been a really important part of my ride in crypto because of the Coinbase days as well. And so when I joined them at the fund, it was amazing. It was like all the same people who had been involved with Coinbase and all of its success up until that point, including kind of through the direct listing, kind of joining forces in a different context. And then actually the third crypto fund had been deployed and they were deciding on next steps. And Katie had this vision to go create something on her own. And we can talk more about what that was. And it was just really compelling to me. And I actually think I've just been in this different phase of my career where I'm no longer, in-house operating. And I think of all the interesting things, doors to open at this phase for me professionally, what's more interesting than starting a new fund from the ground up with someone as compelling as Katie? So it was bittersweet to say goodbye to the amazing A16Z team. Actually, we're all such good friends and we have all that history. But again, for me professionally, just something I couldn't say no to.
So you mentioned the fund itself. Why don't you also give us a little bit of the ethos of the fund and what you guys are doing and sort of what inspires you to continue to invest in this industry that, as you noted, has been such a wild ride over the last 3 years.
Yeah, well, I think we've always had conviction. I mean, everyone actually, we're very small. That's one of the things we talk a lot about. We'll remain small. That's the plan in terms of humans. The funds are on the larger side, but the team itself is quite small. And we think of it as nimble and flexible and scrappy and hardworking. But everyone here has been in crypto a long time. And everyone here has experience. There's a lot of alumni from the Coinbase team. We have Diogo Monica, who has been building crypto Anchorage, founder for a really long time. Now he calls himself an engineer that allocates capital. And so what we have as a team, and I think all crypto funds have this, honestly, it's not totally what differentiates us, is deep conviction in this space. I think what makes us different in the original vision by Katie and what we've all believed is that crypto would not remain niche for very long. And that sooner or later, and honestly, we saw this, as early as 2017 and 2018. We saw signs of this in 2021. Crypto has been going mainstream. Crypto has never felt more inevitable. And we sort of saw this future where a lot of people are going to use crypto and they probably wouldn't even know it was crypto. And so we wanted to place ourselves and situate ourselves amongst these funds, crypto funds in particular, as the team that's really excels at bridging from the crypto universe into larger venues and contexts and audiences, and being a really good partner to the type of founder who wants to build really huge businesses and go really mainstream. And I think we can talk about this later, but I think this is where our firm kind of stands out in a lot of ways. At least we hoped it would. And honestly, when we started the fund, you recall, Sam, wild times, right? Immediately out of the gate, the market plummets. We have FTX. We actually have the Silicon Valley banking crisis. And then, of course, we have this sort of regulatory onslaught where it really actually genuinely felt like in America, is crypto going to be okay? And even in the midst of all that, we still had very deep conviction and we were working really hard on partnering with founders who had every intention of building really big businesses. Stablecoins is an example of that we can talk about. So it's sort of that bridging worlds from crypto into the mainstream in a lot of different contexts is
Mm.
what we hope to build. And I think so many people in crypto, ourselves included, I think it's wild to see. We thought over like a 5-year period, 5 to 7 year, that's the venture timeline. This thesis will play out. You will see these pieces coming together for our industry. The fact that we're here in 3 years is kind of mind blowing to me. I'm sure to you too.
Yes, very different world now than when we joined. I'm interested in, when I look at the portfolio of On Ventures, you have a lot of different types of projects in there. And, there's like the Aptoses on the side of chains themselves. You have like Fireblocks, you have Chainalysis, you have a lot of infra and understanding how people are engaging. You also have like Farcaster, OpenSea, Third Web. So you still like seems like pretty bullish on the kind of Web3 side of Web3, if you will, or the kind of social side of Web3. All of those groups have had such a wild ride. How do you maintain a stability and a conviction in your guidance to them? Right. I can imagine, you get a call from Devin over at OpenSea just being like, I don't know what's going on, but we're still doing it. What do you recommend we do? Like, how do you help them think of these very volatile swings for so many different groups that you've probably had to see through some very great bullish times and through some very tough times?
Yeah, I think that's, as a team, we talk about this a lot. I think Katie and Diogo have spoken about this pretty publicly. Diogo, in particular, as a founder, as I'm sure you've observed, and I'm so close to this that I forget. I think being a founder in crypto is really, really hard, like really hard. You navigate being a founder in general is really, really hard. And then when you layer on crypto and the cycles and the sentiment, whether it's media or more mainstream sentiment, and then the markets, we say here at Han Ventures that crypto is both a market and a technology. And so, what many of us are trained to do, I actually credit Brian Armstrong with kind of teaching me this day one when I started at Coinbase and entered the space is, we're fiduciaries at the same time for founders and for ourselves. We have a long term vision, and you sort of have to tune out as best you can the market story. And you have to focus on the technology story. You have to focus on developing utility for whoever your main users are for a long time. And this remains the case. The most important user in crypto is the developer. And so you sort of have to stay focused. When I've worked at startups in the past, Twitter, Google, and it was like a long ago past, I'm quite old. A big piece of things is like, and we don't like to admit this today because there's so much tension with the mainstream media and tech these days. However, even that thing where like the first couple engineers you hire or, as your team grows a little bit, a positive piece of media coverage in wherever, you can send that to your parents or your family or your significant other. and say, look, this is what I'm building, and it feels good. And I think with crypto, it's really hard, right? Because there are moments where it feels good and you can send coverage to I'm sure the Circle team right now is sending lots of coverage to their family members. And they're like, see, I told you this thing I was working on really was going to matter and it's really important. But I promise you, Circle had moments where there was, employees saying, yeah, I had to go home for Thanksgiving and explain, ew, crypto, why do you work in that industry? So I think that's a really big challenge for founders, and I think it's my job in general. Most founders in crypto, by the way, who are as exceptional as Devin is, or some of these folks like, the team at Chainalysis or Dan Romero at Farca. I mean, Dan Romero is the one who trained me to think this way. When I first got to Coinbase, the sky was absolutely falling, and Dan and Brian were like, it'll be okay. And I was like, wow, they're so chill. But because they were really focused on the task at hand and the product and all of that. So it's really the founders in general are quite good at this, especially the ones who have been around for a while. They understand how to remain focused and build through these times. They also understand, honestly, how this is why I think valuations can swing around in crypto, to build a war chest when times are good and then practice austerity when times are not good. They sort of get used to operating that way in a way that I think founders in the broader tech industry learned the hard way over, in previous corrections. So they're very good at that. My role is to help them tell those stories. So
Mm.
how do you tune out the noise? How do you tune out the headlines? How do you tune out a lot of the negativity, the FUD? And how do you stay really super anchored, whether you're communicating to your employees or to the world or whatever, on the thing you're trying to accomplish and what you're trying to build? And I think just honestly, if you're kind of pre-product market fit, you do have to continue to work on articulating why do you exist and what are you building and why do you think the world needs what you're building? And you have to just get really good at not getting dragged into whatever random part of the discourse is happening, in the world. And you have to stick to your guns in articulating these things. So that ends up being my role, which is you're not crazy. Don't respond to that. That's crazy. Just proactively keep doing what you're doing and have a North Star and be consistent about that. And there's so much you can't control. There's so much in crypto and the world. I think from a macro perspective, I think a lot of people are learning what crypto people know, which is there are a lot of things that are just not in our control, but there are many things you can control. So you should focus on that.
So when we think of the role of the VC, obviously liquidity is just a small part of it, and belief in founders and helping them to sort of achieve their potential is something that's necessary. I also think that in especially a volatile cycle like we've seen in the last 2 years, I can remember times where people were completely skeptical of anyone who's talking stablecoins. In the same way that they might be skeptical about people talking about SocialFi right now or NFTs with what's been going on in the recent times, let's say. So the idea of having conviction in big ideas that are disruptive, the idea that you are betting on those, not every bet's going to pay off. And I think that's fine, right? That's the VC model is let's just make sure we have more winners and losers when it comes down to it. How do you, when someone comes to you and says, all right, I know you guys are an investor in, let's use Farcaster. I know you're an investor in Farcaster. How are they really going to take down a Blue Sky or a Twitter or X, whatever it may be, or Facebook, when it just seems like there's just not that much activity, right? Like, and to me, that's not wrong. And that's not bad to say. We're still early in those things.
Mhm.
Similarly, if you said, hey, what if the world were going to rely on internet money instead of paper money? And this is why you should pay attention to stablecoins, you would have gotten very similar FUD about that in other times, right? So, how do you as VCs talk to also like more the general population to say, hey, these things might feel uncomfortable, but they're still worth looking at, and here's why.
Well, one of the things just to say about Farcaster is I'd push back a little bit on there's not much activity. I think Dan is an incredible founder. And what he's been really clear about is he's pretty focused on winning the crypto conversation right now. And I actually think when I'm over on Farcaster, the pace of execution and the features that Dan is building, it's like really incredible, that team and the experimentation and innovation going on over there in terms of what you might expect from a social media platform that is kind of crypto native. It's really cool. So I actually personally, my crypto takes that you've called spicy. I feel like, oh man, I'm like the most tame person on crypto. But when I take the conversation over to Farcaster, the engagement and the quality of the conversation, particularly around crypto, is just second to none. I actually think it's as maybe we enter a period where more people start to tune into crypto because of all these things happening. I do think Dan is really well positioned to host that conversation. It's become like essential if you want to recruit talent, for example. I tell all of our founders they have to be active over there. So I'd push back a little bit on that, but that's what we see, right? We're betting on an incredible founder like Dan, who is super smart, super hardworking, and really native to the space. And then to your point about, that vision, one of the things I think we have to be a little bit more, we have to own a little bit more in crypto. This is I think the funniest thing about crypto, I look in Silicon Valley, and as long as I worked in tech my whole career, basically, we're really good. We excel. What we do is we paint a vision, an audacious vision of the way the world will be and could be, thanks to the technologies we're building. And I think that is, for better or worse. Some people are really inspired by that. Other audiences sometimes are turned off. But for better or worse, it's what we do. And it's actually how it's kind of the secret sauce of this place. I think in most cases, though, when you are trying to, and when I think about Google, when I think about my time at Twitter, we're saying the cultural conversation will happen on Twitter. This is inevitable. This is because of certain primitives. There's this thing called the social web. There's this thing called an interest graph. Like all of these things are going to come together, and it's going to end up being a really powerful force. And people could believe it because they could actually use it at the time. So you could first talk to like tech bloggers and then tech journalists and then other VCs and other execs. And then maybe you could show your mom and dad, and people would say, okay, you sound a little crazy. And also I can sort of touch and feel this. Crypto is different, I think, because frankly, the ratio of like audacious vision to like actual use cases is constantly off. And I think that's a little bit our fault. It's been like 80% like bananas future vision and 20% highlighting what's actually working. I wouldn't say it's that only 20% is working. I would just say that we've never focused the conversation on what I call what's on the truck right now. And so, for example, your bringing up stablecoins is exactly what I think about when I think about this issue. And I think we're correcting it, honestly, finally, at long last, which is stablecoins were working. They actually found product market fit a while ago, right? Like there was clearly, you could totally make the case that, hey, we created a digital programmable dollar. There was this huge demand for stable currencies globally. There's actually a huge demand for the US dollar globally. In places like Turkey, USDT is not even to my point about people won't even think of something as crypto. They think of it as money, right? In certain places. And stablecoins started to see tremendous growth, not just this year, like through the period where we were all, in a doom and gloom catastrophe. And what we should have been saying as an industry at the time, and where we were making the case to audiences. And by the way, we have a platform. This is, I think, where Han Ventures stands out, thanks to Katie, thanks to her reputation and the credibility she's built up. I think when she goes into whether it's a closed venue with powerful people, Wall Street, here in Silicon Valley, in Washington, D.C., and says, look, a programmable digital dollar is a really fascinating innovation. And if nothing comes out of crypto, then a third payments revolution, that alone is huge. That's trillions and trillions of dollars, right? And so we were saying that. I think as an industry, though, we had a hard time just owning that win, right? We were like, way off in metaverse places, right? And so I think this is a bit of a cell phone because it's fun. Like the tools are there. I think Chris Dixon talks about like, look at what people are hacking around with on the weekends to understand what's going to come next. And we've had like really compelling pieces, to hack around with, and it's very fun and we're building, but then we kind of get crazy in terms of like what this might lead to. So I think we're in a better place where now credibly you can actually start to take audiences on this journey. And this is what we've been doing at Hone Ventures, where now you can understand we were the ones telling you 3 years ago, 2 years ago, stablecoins are really important. They're growing fast. You're going to see a ton of innovation on this space. Actually, people are probably going to use stablecoins. They won't even know they're using stablecoins. This is like going to really change payments. And then voila, Stripe acquires Bridge. And I think a lot of people are paying attention. Circle's public offering has even more people paying attention. That creates an opening to say, well, if you can tokenize a dollar, what else might you tokenize? And then you start to get into the really interesting conversation around real world assets. Then you start to get into the really interesting conversations around going public on the blockchain, right? And so you can bring people along on like a fairly, like, still it's audacious. We are probably going to power the future of the financial system and the global economy. Blockchains are clearly going to play a huge role in upgrading that system, and still, you can take people on a pragmatic journey as well, and they can start to understand what might actually happen. I think as far as NFTs, social media, a creator economy, we're kind of in that place where people, I think with those early primitives around the tokenized dollar, for example, it was hard to imagine. I think we're in this place where there's these interesting pieces to the puzzle that make sense, like, digital scarcity. And in a world where AI creates abundance, how do you enforce IP? Blockchains turns out are quite good at that. How do you rethink the web in a way that empowers creators? Does blockchain have a role to play there? I anticipate by the time this is live, I think Coinbase will have had its event and they're going to be painting that vision. So I think we try to help audiences outside of our niche world understand that if you start with the technology story and you look at these pieces, it's not guaranteed, and we might be very wrong. But theoretically, you can put these pieces together in such a way that could end up being quite cool. And so time will tell. And I think when you decouple that from the market story, ears start to open. I think for Hunt Ventures, though, the messenger matters. And so I think, if folks like Diogo and Katie and the team here are saying, yeah, you could imagine like a tokenized, other types of financial instruments tokenized, they're open to that message versus if you're being like super crazy on Twitter and people are like, yeah, right, those crypto people say crazy stuff all the time. So I think the messenger matters, and we take care to keep our reputation credible and build trust with those different audiences.
Yeah. So one, I want to go back and say, look, I'm not here to attack Farcaster. I don't think that is a failure by any means. I think that Farcaster has generated a really dynamic audience on a specific topic, and I also think that often the real innovation may not be the thing you start with. So I'm very interested to see what Farcaster comes out with as an example. In the same way, I'm very interested to see what the Zoras and Open Seas of the world are going to be doing in terms of the scarcity around digital objects, as you mentioned, and the provenance and unique ownership. I think all of that stuff is things we're going to be talking about for decades, not years. And so, so in that way, I think that where I think the narrative to the outside crypto world is, is one that I think is also one that crypto doesn't win always very well. Right. And I will say that through the lens of, sure, we can talk about this amazing developer community happening on Farcaster, and then we can look at GitHub, right? Or we could look at Slashdot, or we can look at some of these other places. We could look at the spaces in which creativity is thriving, and we can talk about OpenSea, or we can talk about TikTok. And those are two different things, but to the outside world, they're not same, but equal, right? They're different in their minds. And whereas I do think that we look at it through the lens of, if a internet economy can happen in World of Warcraft, there's no reason an internet economy can't happen in a creator universe or can't happen in a town in Africa, right? That happens in something we can all align to. Oh, that makes total sense. When I talk about the idea of sending money at the speed of light to places that don't have robust financial systems because you want donation. So I guess my question is about you. You are taking bets on the future. And some of that future might be very soon, and some of that future might be in a minute. How do you balance that out to those who might be your LPs who are saying, hey, when are we getting paid back on our money? Or to a politician who says, this stablecoin thing isn't anything.
Well, a couple of things. One, so LPs are our LPs were really fortunate. They venture people forget is a very long timeline. We operate more on a 7 to 10 year timeline. And so, we make sure to bring on folks who take a long-term view of the space as well, right? And they understand venture. They understand that some things work, some things don't. And so that one's actually quite straightforward. To your question about the longer term, the other audiences. It's interesting, in the early days of my career, I'll never forget, I actually left. Well, I was at Google the day that the company announced we were acquiring YouTube. And there was this really strong thesis at Google that this user generated content, thanks to the internet, was going to be a really big deal. And I can't remember how long, it was forever. Whereas a company, we were battling questions from the street around when will this thing be profitable? What is even happening with this YouTube thing? And obviously YouTube has become, one of the most important aspects of Google's business ever. And so it was a long time. You sort of have to see one part of the innovation and take a stab at why that's destined to go places and what people will do. And to your point about creativity, and then, understand that you're gonna be hunting around in the dark trying to monetize that thing. You know what? Very similarly, when I went to Twitter, there were a lot of people in my life, parents included, that were like, "What is this? Literally, how will this thing make money?" Like, we understand how it works, and we're starting to understand social media, and we understand that you're growing users quite fast, but, like, you will never make money. And I don't know if you remember at Facebook and Twitter, there were so many hits and misses and attempts at monetizing, right? Finding a business model, right? Do you remember? I don't know if anyone remembers Beacon. There was
Hmm.
a big rollout of their, yeah, and it was like a total disaster, and everyone was like, "This sucks and is stupid." Crypto, we have the opposite problem, I find. We monetize pretty quickly in this space. And the big question is, when do the use cases come? Where are users going to be? Who's actually going to use this stuff? And so I don't think it's that different than technology waves of the past. And to your point, it's sort of our job, me as a marketer and a communicator, and then as a fund, I think a lot of funds in crypto, Han Ventures in particular, we do end up taking on an evangelist role for the sector. And again, I think that's where trust, credibility, legitimacy, having an ear to the mainstream conversation. We tell founders all the time. Actually, we tell, sometimes our own investment team, you can get so close to this where you're like, this team is the biggest brand, they're killing it, and they are in a certain context, and it's going really well, and actually it's monetized. But then it's really fun to bring founders, even some folks on our own team, even myself. We actually make a point to get out of our echo chamber. And, I will go to LA and I'll meet with folks in entertainment. We will be in Washington, DC, meeting with the most interesting people a lot of the time are just down the road at Apple and Google, friends like that. And then, of course, Wall Street. And they're like, I'm sorry, fast forward, we're like, stablecoins. And they're like, rewind. I've never heard the word stablecoin before. Right. And so it is not even that the sentiment isn't there or that it's unbelievable. It is like, we are so early in how much any of this has even reached people. You totally have to keep yourself honest. And again, in a world where this stuff is, I think, primed to go very mainstream, stable coins, for example, I think there's an aspect of crypto, Sam, as you noted, that is more infrastructure than end user experiences, right? And I think stable coins are this funny thing where people thought, oh, is there a consumer demand for the stablecoin? And there is in some cases. But if you look at teams like we've backed BVNK or Bridge, what Stripe acquired, that is like any fintech. It's just moving money around, and it happens to be building on top of this platform that we call stablecoins. And so it's I think when people start to understand that in a lot of contexts, stable coins are to the market what Stripe is to the market or what Plaid is to the market, plays more of an infrastructure role. They're like, oh, like it's if you think of crypto as core financial infrastructure, people sort of get off of the like, when do I get to use this thing? And I won't believe it till I use it. And so you have to kind of find your way into helping people understand this technology and what to make of it. And actually, I think we're seeing way more progress on this front than we've ever seen. So it's great.
Let's tap into your CMO brain. You've worked at a lot of successful companies. So if you were the CMO of all crypto, what would you be doing? And then if you were the CMO of all VCs, what would you be doing? Because I think both need still a polish that they don't have right now.
I think for venture, I mean, the great privilege is doing this at Han Ventures, and so I have a fun seat at the table in terms of how venture is perceived in the world. And I think I really loved the way Andreessen Horwitz categorized what we all do in venture as little tech. And I think that distinction is quite meaningful and was someone needed to articulate that a while ago. So I thought that was really smart and really helpful because I think what we do is work with I think one of the cool I think we need to make a better case more often about how important this industry is to America. And I think that it's a very, very unique aspect of this country and, the access to risk capital that anyone, really talented people with ideas and like immense talent, particularly technological talent, have access to is really important. I think, again, like a really recent example of this is stable coins. I think the United States government has been talking about studying, a CBDC or something. I actually thought it was much wiser for us from a kind of national security perspective. And when you think about the future of money movement and how important that is to the country, to bet on our tech sector and our private sector. And that's ended up being true, right? We are off and running and we've got these great issuers and we've got this great technology and we are competing in the future of the global economy. And so I think that continuing to highlight and point out where this sector plays such an important role is key. I guess the other thing about venture, I think we're still growing up. I think it's actually weird. It's been around a long time, but in other ways, I think that we haven't seen political, cultural shifts this big in a really long time. I think a lot of people who are currently operating in tech and venture kind of came up through like the Obama era. And we're kind of in the midst of these immense cultural swings. And I think everyone's trying to find their voice and their place and what's their role and all that. We think, for example, with crypto, we're really lucky right now in Washington, D.C. If you look at Congress and you look at the Senate, we have really nuanced thinkers, open-minded folks on both sides of the aisle who are very pro crypto, from Senator Gillibrand to, Congressman Richie Torres to Senator Scott. Like we think it's like important. And I think this is a larger lesson for venture to actually identify friends of tech and really celebrate those in DC who are celebrating this sector and the importance of it, regardless of what party. And so I think, and one thing with crypto is it tends to skew younger, like under 50, they're probably pro crypto, they're probably pro tech and older. So it's less left and right and more by age. And I think we need as a venture community to embrace those politicians on the younger side who understand the role technology is going to play in America, in the economy for national security purposes. So that's one. If I were the CMO of crypto, I mean, I think one of the things I'd be trying to do is encourage higher quality storytelling across the board. I think that by that, I mean, like, I really loved the era of Coinbase that Kate Rao was driving as CMO there. And we're friends, and she's at OpenAI now, and we work together at Facebook. And I think in the midst of this just immensely aggressive backlash against the industry coming from regulators in particular, Kate, I think creative vision, that the high quality content she was putting out in these really strategic ways that created moments, like really great 30-minute spots. I think the way she led Coinbase's program through that moment was just brilliant. And everything had a high production quality to it. The storytelling was extremely sharp. She found new ways into telling the story of why crypto to bigger audiences, broader audiences. I genuinely think that did so much to keep this industry afloat and turn things around, and she sort of hooked some of that storytelling to the larger policy debate around crypto, but then at the same time, she made crypto and Coinbase's brand super relevant in the broader culture. So, more of that, please. I loved that for us, but I think it actually what she did, it wasn't like when you think of, like, AI slop or every video looks the same right now, like, everyone's doing podcasts, like, she created things on behalf of Coinbase that really stood out and started broader cultural conversations beyond just Coinbase and beyond kind of the venture Silicon Valley Twitter universe, and I thought it was really well done, and I would love to see more of that.
So it feels like what you're saying also is natively being a good storyteller, but also connecting to the sort of higher level of what can turn us on as people, right? Like big, audacious, auspicious aspiration. Those messages are the ones that we need. I feel like the meme coin era kind of took us away from that quite a bit. We really got back into like the 2018, like ICO, let's get rich, like model that doesn't, I think, help us in the long run. Even though some of the ideas around mimetic value are like super interesting, that doesn't mean maybe that should be the narrative of crypto at that moment.
No, I think we're really good at, it's permissionless innovation, and so we are really good as a ecosystem at trying random things that get kind of crazy, and I think the wisest among us see within something that most would write off as bad or a total casino. We have plenty of founders, I'm sure you've seen folks who see the core innovation at the heart of something that might be turning the rest of the world off. So I think that aspect of our industry is important and it's something we're always battling against. I think when I talk about what Kate did with Coinbase and to your point about memes, or there is this art to marketing. We did this at Twitter, we did this at Google, where you are very aware of the larger discourse, the larger cultural conversations, like Prime Day. If you're on Instagram or TikTok, the average American knows it's Prime Day, is getting bombarded with Prime Day. There's a mom angle, there's a dad angle, there's like all these different, there's a gadget angle. I do think that crypto has an issue with not engaging in that conversation ever, and sometimes not even knowing that that type of conversation is going on. And so I think we're very good at kind of this brew of like innovation, thinking deeply about like, cypherpunk values, like all these really important things to the world. And within a kind of Silicon Valley insular conversation, crypto is playing a larger and larger role there. It's very like engineer driven. And I think part of maturing, if I had to guess over the next 2 years, I would bet, given the goals and the aspirations of a lot of the founders you're seeing, whether you're talking about Farcaster or you're talking about stablecoin teams, they want to insert themselves into the larger conversation about the future of payments and small businesses and remittances and cross-border, so which means that we need to get better at understanding what conversation is already happening out there and find our way in versus trying to incept our crypto story and values onto the world all the time and then feel a little disoriented when no one knows what we're talking about. So I think we're going to get there. I wouldn't trade what we're already great at for the world. I think that's part of the secret sauce, but I do think that we're going to grow up a bit and start to get more attuned and probably bring in, honestly, marketers, growth marketers, brand builders who can deeply understand what crypto is and why it's important and the technology, which can be really, really hard, right, to grok, and then find ways to shape that story and insert it into a broader conversation that's happening elsewhere.
All right. My final question for you is around AI. I'm sure this is an area you guys spend a lot of time thinking about and talking to folks on. I've been both very interested and slightly turned off by the discussions around these, $200 million pay packages, these multi-billion-dollar acquihire acquisition, the sort of big AI groups are making. And partly because I know, you've been doing this long enough, I've been doing this long enough to know that if someone is willing to pay that much for that talent, that means they think there's an exponential return on that talent when it comes to what they'll make. Which to me, even though holding Bitcoin from the beginning, you're doing quite well. I think crypto has a different ethos about how we look at kind of owning your data, owning your experience, participatory financial systems. So, I go back and forth with people about whether or not and why we want decentralization in AI, because I do think it helps reset those incentives for many reasons, especially on the ingestion side of, the people training the models should be rewarded for the info they're given. But I think, the core five, top 10, 10 AI companies in the world have no interest in even having that discussion. And frankly, are making so much money or getting so much investment from capital markets that they just don't care. Where do you sit on like the crypto AI intersection? And do you think that's gonna pan out, or do you think we've already lost that war?
Well, to your point about the larger, again, like cultural values around AI, I think that the reason I joined crypto as an industry in like late 2017 and went over to Coinbase is because, when I started at Twitter, for example, and actually a lot of the amazing thinkers around IP and speech and First Amendment left Google and headed over to Twitter, and it was at a time when we really valued transparency, we valued user privacy. We actually were creating open platforms for developers, right? And then they rolled it all back. And above all, we were free speech maximalists at the time, and we felt like this was a really important value of the internet, and it was worth fighting for. And I think obviously as the businesses grew and that matured, that got really more complicated, and these platforms lost a lot of trust. And I think one of the things that we've talked about a lot is take algorithms, for example, Twitter, Facebook, it's a black box. We sense that something's up. People talk about being shadow banned all the time. I think as an end user, you're constantly feeling rather manipulated. And then on top of everything else, they're monetizing you and your content. You're not getting a cut of any of that. And so, you could say, look, a lot of these companies have done fine without trust being kind of extractive in this way and losing, I think, sight of the importance of those early internet values. And they still grew. However, I think Facebook paid a very deep price for some of those brand issues. They weren't able to actually launch their own stablecoin because of the regulator backlash. We have this antitrust situation, right? That's messing up M&A, right? So there's been consequences to losing sight of the broader conversation around how we build technology. Crypto is just awesome at this in general. Like there's different examples across, our ecosystem and through time, and we definitely have scam artists. But I do think at the core, like when I think of, Ethereum, or I think whatever, like everyone's in this industry because we care deeply about privacy. We care deeply about, Chris Dixon always calls it can't be evil versus don't be evil. We like building systems that are trustless. And so I'm very proud to be in this industry. It's very aligned with my own values. And I do think that teams in AI are headed very quickly for a similar type of reckoning that the big tech teams did, particularly around privacy of my data, how it's being used, who's benefiting from it, and transparency. How are decisions being made? Who makes the decisions? And so, yeah, in a world where crypto is saying we've created a whole new way to develop software, monetize software, and govern software. And now, like, take Ethereum, like Robinhood just chose, like, I think Ethereum may end up being, you know, I mean, all the stablecoin volume is over there. Like, it is going to power the future of the financial system. And we completely reinvented how to think about transparency and software from that perspective. We do have to think even more deeply about privacy, I believe, but we hold ourselves to this standard. And I think right now that AI is so competitive, to your point, there's a talent competition. There is like who is shipping the best technology, the fastest, the valuations are going. So yeah, in some ways it feels like everything is being considered and is on the table, but the core values that will shape this industry. I know we're not that deep into, we think so I think the values of crypto are good. I think the future of Silicon Valley, I hope that we continue to build and move quickly so we can be even more influential in this way, and I actually hope that our train collides with AI sooner than later, because I just think it'll be a better internet, a better world if the way crypto thinks about building starts to influence AI a little bit more, if that makes sense.
I love that. That's a great mic drop moment. Rachel, thank you for spending so much time with us, and super excited to talk to you. You've had an amazing career, and just really happy to have you on the show.
Thanks, Sam. Thanks for having me.
All right. We'll talk to you soon.